Thank you, Kevin. Good afternoon, my fellow Americans. Don't get to say that often. It's an all-American concert. That's why the introduction. Who has never been here before? Any new faces? Guess, wonderful. Yes, wonderful. New people, you're doing the work. Word of mouth is the best. Why waste money on advertising when you can gossip? Okay, so you already probably know this is not going to be a lecture. It never is. It's a chat. I'll be doing most of the talking, but it's also open to questions at any point about anything that comes up during my chat about the music you're about to enjoy as played by the Santa Barbara Symphony, or anything musicological. Sometimes people just ask questions like, what's a zither? That's fine. I have no idea what a zither is, by the way. I do, but I'm not going to answer that question. Okay, it's a long program, so we need to get going here. We have actually 3 composers, one centrally, Leonard Bernstein. We'll get to him. I'm going to take out the first 2 with some alacrity here so we can get to Bernstein. You have a world premiere today, the music of Robin Frost, who is a resident here in Santa Barbara, who's been writing music for a long time. He was born in 1930. He was the guest of honor last night there in the balcon. It's a world premiere of his piano concerto, played by our house pianist, Natasha Kislenko, with the symphony. It's in 3 movements, about 20 minutes long. It's fun, lighthearted, jazzy, and introspective music, and it's a world premiere. Congratulations to the Santa Barbara Symphony for doing the good work. You need to have an influx of new music in order to keep your organization alive. Orchestras that rely, although most orchestras rely a lot on older, established music, if you cut off the new music, you dwindle. Your orchestra, which is a living, vibrant thing, becomes a museum, or at worst, a mausoleum for music. Let's not do that. So kudos to the Santa Barbara Symphony. I wish more symphonies had the courage yours has. And that also includes a shout out to Nir Cabaretti, your music director, for programming pieces like this. That's the first piece. Actually, it's not the first piece on the program. Go ahead. That's the first composer. The second one is possibly more familiar to you, Aaron Copland. The great American dean of American composers. Born in 1900, died in 1990. He's the one that went to France after World War I, studied with Madame Boulanger, and learned how to write American music based on the example of a Russian expatriate, Stravinsky, as interpreted by a French pedagogue, Nadia Boulanger, and he brought the new gospel home in the 20s in an attempt to write serious art music that had an American heft to it, an American flavor to it. So it was essentially a synthesized sound where he took the materials and the learning of European classical music and reinterpreted it, inspired by Stravinsky's reinterpretation of the same materials, into a new modern sound that he personally, consciously crafted to give orchestras and chamber ensembles and even vocalists a new way of exploring the same notes that Beethoven used. So it doesn't sound like Beethoven, it sounds like Copland, it sounds like America. The piece you're going to hear is from 1940, when he was just finding his feet in this regard. He was experimenting during the 20s and in the 30s. He experimented with jazz. The great idol at the time was Gershwin. 1924, Rhapsody in Blue. And Copland had much more training, much more education. He was a very different person than Gershwin. He was more introspective. He was like something like a little bird of a man. Very modest, very quiet. You wouldn't notice him. And his music has this potential where he was not a great showman like Leonard Bernstein or Gershwin. He was a very thoughtful composer, and he was drawn to a play called Quiet City by Irwin Shaw. Irwin Shaw, you might know most likely from his novels. In the 30s, like so many of the Jewish intellectual movements that were crisscrossing in New York City, Irwin Shaw wrote experimental plays, theater works, for the group theater. Harold Clurman, Stella Adler, etc., that whole school of training for actors. And they put on his plays, which were admittedly experimental. Copland was invited, or he was actually part of the group theater, sort of, to write the music for Quiet City, incidental music, and it inspired him to one of his most touching scores. It's called Quiet City. It's about 9 minutes long, and the orchestral version that you're going to hear has string orchestra, English horn, or cor anglais. Interesting that the English horn gets a French name. Classical music, and solo trumpet. In your notes, it's a little misleading. It says that the trumpet, or the trumpeter, is the main character in the play. That's not true. The trumpeter in the play is a jazz trumpeter, a Jewish guy named, I think it's Melinikov, Dave Melinikov, something like that. I forget his first name. But his brother, Gabriel, who is not a trumpeter, Gabriel is not the trumpeter. He is also Jewish. He's a descendant of the first wave of Russian immigrants, and he denies his patrimony. He distances himself from his heritage. He doesn't like to be identified as a Jew, so he changes his name to Melon instead of Melinikov. So it's Gabe Melon. He marries a shiksa. He gets into the business of supermarkets, becomes wealthy, important, he's a power player, and then when people hear his brother play his horn, and his brother is happy-go-lucky, sleeps on people's couches, not interested in money, loves the girls, he's at ease with himself. When they hear his music, people go, oh, that's who we are. When his brother hears it, he is reminded painfully of what he didn't want to be, and he has to deal with his identity. That's why, and lots of plays were written with this sort of patina in those days. So that's the real dirt behind Quiet City. Any questions? Did I offend every shiksa in the room? I should be so lucky. I've offended every Jew in the room. Thank you for that clarification. I am in shul with you. Thank you. Enough. Sorry, genug. Genug. No, I'm not Jewish. I'm Mexican. With a naughty ear. Okay, enough of that. Now, the man of the hour. 100 years ago this year, in 1918, two world-shattering events happened. First, the bad news. The Spanish influenza that killed about 40 million people. Psh, forget that. The good news. Leonard Bernstein was born on August 25th in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and became the most important musical personality in classical music, at least, so far, for the last 100 years. The most important American musician in the classical music realm we've ever had, and there's no one that comes close. That's why we're celebrating him here and around the world. Orchestras and musical organizations are playing his music, they're holding symposia, they're writing lectures and essays, and holding festivals in his name. Bernstein was introduced to music in his home at the age of 10. His father's house, Samuel Bernstein, his father was a successful beauty salon supply magnate. He came from Russia as a boy, and as did Jenny Bernstein, née Resnick, who was Leonard Bernstein's mother. She cleaned fish. He worked any job he could, and he ended up in the beauty supply business, established himself a nice home, and that's where Leonard Bernstein was born, the first of 3 children. Bernstein's aunt, Aunt Clara, went through a divorce when he was 10 years old, and her upright piano came to the Bernstein's house. And that's when Leonard Bernstein began to be Leonard Bernstein. They couldn't pry him off the piano with tools. He was playing the piano as much as he could. His father opposed it, his mother encouraged it. In order to get piano lessons, he asked his father, who begrudgingly agreed to $1 a week, I think is what it was back in those days. And it wasn't enough. As he got better and better, he was wearing out the piano teachers. Leonard Bernstein used to play in jazz clubs as a teenager by ear in order to earn money to get piano lessons on his own. That's just the beginning. He went to the Boston Latin School. He was a brilliant student. He went to Harvard. Brilliant. They say he was lazy, but he was actually preoccupied with music. He wrote music all the time. He had an unending, profound lust for music. And he would tell you that in no uncertain terms. It obsessed him to the last day of his life. A day without music for him was an unthinkable thing. So he goes to Harvard. In 1937, he meets Aaron Copland at Aaron Copland's birthday. This is an unknown kid from Harvard. Mr. Copland, I've been playing your music for 2-3 years. I know everything you. I didn't know you're Aaron. Yes, well, they became friends. At the birthday party, Bernstein went to the piano and banged out Copland's piano variations, one of the hardest scores that ever written for that instrument. Copland was overwhelmed by the talent of this kid and the extremely good performance of the music. The rest of the room vanished. And Bernstein said, I could clear any room in New York or in Boston in 6 minutes. The polite ones would stay for 7. He was a great advocate of modern music, and that was some pretty edgy stuff. Okay, so that's in the youth. What you're going to hear today is a panoply of his music, beginning from 1944 when he was establishing himself in New York as a composer. In 1943, on November 14th, he was called in on extremely short notice to take over one concert for an ailing Bruno Walter, who was the guest conductor slated to play that day. Bernstein had been given the position of assistant conductor, which is a no-hope situation for young conductors, where he had to learn the scores and memorize them and know everything about them just in case something happened and he had to go on or they needed help at the rehearsal. It's essentially an understudy position that's permanent. And conductors very rarely get sick. On November 14th, he was called in for the guest conductor who took ill, and on very short notice, with a hangover from a party the night before, the kid put on a suit, took the stick, raised his hands, and became the greatest American conductor, period. I miss him. Pardon me, a little verklempt I am. It could happen. So, that's 1943. In 1944, April, he writes a ballet called Fancy Free, based on 3 sailors with a 24-hour Cinderella Liberty, I think they call it. They're boys off the boat in the big city. They're going to meet girls and have a good time. Yay! So Fancy Free is this orchestral score. It's a ballet. It was premiered at the Metropolitan Opera, choreography by Jerome Robbins, I believe, and it was a hit. The interesting thing is that Bernstein was never interested in writing fairy tales. never interested in putting fantastic mythological stories in perfect worlds on stage. He was into what was going on around the world now. So in 1944, the US and the rest of the world is in a World War situation. Bernstein writes a ballet about 3 sailors who are at war, who have 24 hours to find the girls and have a good time, have some drinks, and then get back on the boat and perhaps go to their deaths. That's Fancy Free. His music is utterly rhythmic. It's based on pop music of the time. It actually has a pop song that he wrote for Billie Holiday to sing when they would pre-record it. They couldn't afford her. Years later, well, actually months later, they could afford her, and she recorded it 7 times. It's called Big Stuff, by the way. That's how the ballet opens. You're going to hear 3 dances from later in the ballet, based on the main theme that opens the opening tableau. The 3 dances are a galop, a waltz, and a danzón, a Cuban dance. This is the beginning of Bernstein's expression of his utter fascination with all manner of music. He wasn't interested in just writing a certain type of music. He was eating every kind of music is a different restaurant for him. So Cuban music shows up in this score, bebop music, big band music, all kinds of influences converge in this score. And that's the first score, 1944, April. December of 44, Fancy Free is so successful that he is commissioned to write a musical, On the Town, based on the ballet. Same story, 3 guys off a boat, 24 hours liberty, but this time they have words and they sing songs and they meet the girls. And the girls are not ballerinas, they're characters in a musical. Particularly, you'll see it in the one song taken from that show that you'll hear today. It's called I Can Cook Too. Do you know the song? Okay. It's a comedian's song. It was written for Nancy Walker. And the song is ostensibly about cooking, but it's actually about cooking. So, when they get off the boat, they thought they're going to meet some nice girls. No, they met New York women. Remember, it's the real world. The girls are wearing trousers and riveting and making airplanes and driving taxis and chomping cigars and drinking hard bourbon and staying up all night because the men are gone and they've got to run the world. They've got to run the city. So the boys get off the boat. They think they're going to get a couple of sweet girls from Iowa. No. The one that they encounter, one of them is Brunhilde Esterhazy. Wears pants, smokes like a chimney, and drives a taxi, and is hot to trot. She chases down the men, in particular one of them. And her song, I Can Cook Too, it's all about double entendre. It's sweet and it's gentle. No, it's not. It's about, let's go back to my place and cook. I've got a pot roast in the oven for you. So that's just 1, 2. Okay, so that's the 1, 2 from 1944. Moving on to 1953. From On the Town to Wonderful Town. Another single song. This is a song called A Little Bit in Love. This was a rescue operation. There was a series of stories called My Sister Eileen. This became a play. This play became a musical in the hands of other creators. It floundered badly, and the friends of Bernstein, Adolph Green and Betty Comden, who were their lyricists and performers, were called in to save the show. They said, we got to get Lenny in on this. And so he came in to write the music. They rewrote the whole show, and he wrote a wonderful, wonderful score for this, based on these sweet stories, again, of a girl from Ohio coming to New York. This time it's a girl and finding romance in the big city. Similar trope. And because it wasn't his show originally, he writes appropriate music to the task. It's basic Broadway music. He could write a show tune, just a basic show tune, without having to have any overlay of any more import. His politics and his sensual interests often make themselves felt in his work. We'll get to that later in West Side Story. So you have those two songs, one from On the Town, another from Wonderful Town. Any questions so far? We're in 1953. I'm not even born yet. Okay. 1956. I'm still not born. My parents have been married for a year. Candide. This is an operetta brought into being by, at the invitation of its writer, its creator, Lillian Hellman, based on the 1759 novel of Voltaire, which itself was a satire of the world around Voltaire, particularly the philosophy of Leibniz, and I'm not going to go into the heavy history. That's a pot of coffee we can discuss later. So, the play is a satire about the overweening optimism of people in power who would like to have the world defined on their terms for them, and you need to learn to agree with this. Does this sound familiar to anyone? Recent news about denying reality and instead pasting something over it and saying, no, 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 that's fake. This is real. Well, in the character of the novel, there is a character named Pangloss, who is the maestro, the master teacher, who explains everything. It's in his name, Pangloss. He glosses over everything. So the world is crazy, the world's dangerous, the world's cruel, and young Candide and his beloved Cunegonde find heartbreak and loss and tragedy and disaster, and they wonder, how can the world be good? The teaching is, it is the best of all possible worlds. That's one of the key lines in it. It's the best of all, it's not a good world, it's the best of all possible worlds. It doesn't say it's the best of all conceivable worlds. It's just it's perfect as it can be given the time. And they hide behind this. Well, our innocent Candide does not hide. He asks, Master, how is it possible that these bad things are part of a greater plan, and it's okay, it's good, we can put up with things like torture and inquisitions and horrible human interactions and rape and kidnapping? Is this good? And Pangloss finds a way of explaining everything away. It's fine, don't worry, get with the program, settle down, buy a house in the suburbs, go to work with DuPont. We won the war, don't complain, we're exceptional because we are who we are. Very dangerous territory. I will give you, as a freebie, one stanza from the text of one of the songs called Dear Boy, where Candide asks the master a personal question. Master, you have syphilis. How can that be a good thing? How can syphilis, a venereal disease, be a positive thing in the best of all possible worlds? And you know he has syphilis because he has open wounds, suppurating sores on his skin. And so the answer is, I'm going to borrow the voice of Christopher Walken to do this because this is just too much fun. I'm now Pangloss. I'm going to answer the boy's question. Dear boy, you will not hear me speak with sorrow or with rancor of what has paled my rosy cheek and blasted it with canker. 'Twas love, great love, that did the deed through nature's gentle laws. And how could ill effects proceed from so divine a cause? Sweet honey comes from bees that sting, as you are well aware. To one adept at reasoning, whatever pains disease may bring are but the tangy seasoning to love's delicious fare. buddy of mine dared me to use that voice. I won a cup of coffee. Okay, so in that show, there's all kinds of, it's a big political overlay. In the original story, there is an auto de fe in Spain, the Spanish Inquisition, where they're burning people for their beliefs. When the show was being written in the middle 50s, Joseph McCarthy was holding the House Un-American trials and the American Inquisition. Friends of Leonard Bernstein were being called in front of the Senate subcommittee and being questioned, being burned alive, blacklisted. They're being shut down in New York and in Hollywood. It's not about Voltaire, it's about today. That's why the show is not a great hit. It was considered a flop, but it was actually not a musical either. It was an operetta. I think it's one of the, easily his most underrated works of genius. 1957, West Side Story. They began it in the late 40s, the idea of taking Shakespeare and writing a show, a dramatic musical, based on Romeo and Juliet. You know it all. You know the music, you've heard the songs, you grew up with this music. The story itself was originally going to be between two gangs, Catholics and Jews. I didn't know there was an organized Catholic gang outside the church. It's okay, I can say that. It's in my family. I have a lot of them. It's good. Right. Please don't throw thunderbolts. So, offend the Jews, offend the Catholics. That's my job. So, anyways, the gangs, they finally got that changed because the news at the time was, wait, Puerto Rican gangs and white thugs battling it out in the ghettos of New York. So West Side Story comes in with those two flavors. When they got Leonard Bernstein on board to write the music, once they turned it to Latin Puerto Ricans, he went crazy happy because he adores Latin music, or adored Latin music, and he was able to mine his immense talent to write some of the most brutally violent, beautiful music he ever wrote, particularly the mambo that you're going to hear today, the orchestral mambo, and I Feel Pretty, and the anthem of the show, Somewhere, which is actually the romance part of the show. Just a little tidbit for you. Before they settled on the final title, about 7 weeks before the show went up, on September 26, 1957, the working title of the show had been Romeo. Then they called it the Capulet Project. Then for a while they called it Gangway. Wiser head prevails. We have West Side Story. Any questions? Jets or sharks? Okay, we have 0 minutes. You're kidding me. Oh. 1957. Was I born? Yes, I was born Christmas Eve, 57. There. I think we're into we're gonna skip, we can't go, no, really? I drove all the way from San Diego to be told no. Okay, there's one more piece, but I think there is, from Mass, 1971, right? We'll talk about it out in the foyer. To hell with the rules. Thank you for your kind attention. Please enjoy the concert.